Is that supposed to fix a Black Hawk or bury one? Kyle Mercer's voice cut across the flight line with the clean, sharp edge of a man too young to know how expensive arrogance could become. A few technicians laughed before they even understood the joke. Laughing with the lead tech was easier than standing apart from him. The old man did not laugh. Walter Harlan stood under the hard Alabama sun with one hand wrapped around the handle of a cracked brown leather tool bag. The seams were dark with age. The brass snaps were dulled by decades of oil, rain, dust, and hands that had once worked faster than fear. Behind him, the UH-60 Black Hawk, known as Raven 12, sat dead on the concrete apron at Fort Redstone. Its matte black skin drank in the heat. Its rotor blades hung motionless against a pale afternoon sky. The thermometer near the maintenance shack read 96 degrees, but the silence around that aircraft felt colder than winter steel. 3 diagnostic laptops glowed on a folding table. 2 portable power units hummed beside the landing gear. Cables ran from open panels like veins from a patient no one knew how to wake. Every screen said the same thing in neat green lines. Fuel pressure normal. Ignition sequence ready. Starter circuit clear. Auxiliary power stable. No critical fault detected. The machine, however, refused to believe any of it. Each attempt to start had ended the same way. A dry click beneath the fuselage. A half-second tremor in the frame. Then nothing. No turbine whine. No rising blade chop. No breath. Lieutenant Ryan Caldwell stood near the nose with his arms folded, jaw tight, sunglasses hiding the uncertainty he did not want his men to see. The demonstration flight was already 40 minutes behind schedule. A rescue training team waited 12 miles north in the foothills, positioned near a rocky overlook for a planned emergency response drill. It was supposed to be controlled. Safe. Time to the minute. Raven 12 would lift off, circle the ridge, lower a basket, and return before the heat became a problem. Instead, the most reliable helicopter on the line had become a monument to embarrassment. Kyle wiped his hands on a clean rag and looked Walter up and down, from the faded field jacket to the scuffed boots to the old bag hanging at his side. "No offense, sir," Kyle said, in the tone men use when they mean every ounce of it. "But this bird has a digital nervous system. We have factory software, encrypted maintenance codes, and a direct line to Sikorsky support. Whatever you have got in that bag probably belongs in a county fair display." The laughter came again, lighter this time, nervous at the edges. Walter's pale blue eyes shifted past Kyle, past Caldwell, past the bright screens and polished cases, and settled on Raven 12. He studied the Black Hawk the way some men study a familiar face in a hospital bed. Not with panic, not with pride, with memory. The wind moved once across the flight line, lifting dust around his boots and rattling the loose zipper on his jacket. Walter tightened his grip on the tool bag, not defensively, not angrily, but like a man making sure an old friend was still there. Then he said, quietly enough that the technicians had to stop laughing to hear him, "Machines do not always tell the truth when they are scared." The sentence did not land the way Walter intended. Men like Kyle Mercer did not hear warning in quiet voices. They heard weakness. Kyle turned toward the others with a smirk that asked permission from no one. "You hear that? Raven 12 is scared now." A couple of technicians chuckled. Specialist Noah Bennett did not. He stood beside the folding table with a diagnostic cable looped over one shoulder, watching the old man as carefully as the old man watched the helicopter. There was something in Walter Harlan's stillness that did not belong on a public relations flight line. It was not confusion. It was not nostalgia. It was the focused patience of someone waiting for a machine to finish speaking. Lieutenant Caldwell checked his watch again and looked toward the low ridge line north of the base. The rescue team had already radioed twice for an updated lift time. They had water. They had medics staged nearby. No one was truly abandoned out there. But every person on that apron understood what delay could become when the sun was high, the rocks held heat, and a schedule designed for safety began to stretch thin. Caldwell lowered his voice. "Mercer, I need this aircraft ready." Kyle's smirk faded just enough to reveal the pressure beneath it. "Yes, sir. We are almost there." He had been saying almost there for more than an hour. Kyle turned back to the laptops and tapped through the maintenance interface with quick, irritated fingers. Green status indicators filled the screen like little lies dressed in military order. Main battery voltage was stable. Fuel boost pumps were responsive. Starter relay showed continuity. Engine control signals were within tolerance. Every modern answer pointed toward success. Raven 12 remained silent, as if it had locked a door from the inside. Kyle signaled to a technician in the cockpit. Run the sequence again. The young woman in the left seat glanced at Caldwell, received a tight nod, and reached for the overhead panel. The flight line seemed to hold its breath. A generator hummed. Heat shimmer moved above the concrete. Somewhere near the hangars, a flag snapped once in the dry wind. Then came the attempt. A switch clicked. A relay answered beneath the aircraft. The frame gave a small shudder, barely more than a tremble through the landing gear. For one hopeful second, everyone waited for the turbine to begin its rising scream. It never came. The sound died inside the belly of Raven 12, swallowed by the same dead silence that had embarrassed them all morning. Kyle swore under his breath, soft enough to avoid Caldwell's attention, but loud enough for Walter to hear. The old man's eyes narrowed. Not in anger, in recognition. He stepped 2 paces closer to the aircraft, stopping just short of the yellow safety line. His gaze moved along the lower fuselage, paused near a small access panel behind the auxiliary power housing, then drifted back toward the cockpit. Noah saw it. No guessing. No wandering. Walter had tracked the failure like a man following footprints in dust. Kyle slammed the laptop shut harder than necessary. Everything checks out. There is no fault in that section. Walter did not look at him. That is the problem, he said. It is checking out too clean. Lieutenant Caldwell heard the old man and finally turned his full attention away from the aircraft. Until that moment, Walter Harlan had been an irritation on the edge of a larger failure, a gray-haired civilian standing too close to a restricted maintenance operation. Now he had become something worse. He had become a voice offering answers no one had requested. Caldwell walked toward him with the measured stride of a man trying to look calm in front of subordinates. "Mr. Harlan," he said, letting the name sound like paperwork instead of respect, "I need to understand exactly why you are here." Walter looked at him slowly. The old man's face was lined by sun and years, but not softened by them. White hair curled beneath the edge of an old baseball cap with no logo. His field jacket had once been olive green, but time had pulled the color out of it until it looked almost gray. There were no ribbons on his chest, no patches on his sleeves, no polished signs of rank. Only a plain white t-shirt, faded jeans, scuffed work boots, and that battered leather bag. To the young technicians, he looked like somebody's grandfather who had wandered through the wrong gate. To Noah Bennett, he looked like a man who had removed every visible proof of who he was because the proof no longer mattered to him. Walter nodded toward the operations building beyond the hangar. "General Whitaker asked me to take a look." Caldwell's jaw moved once. "The general is currently hosting senior visitors. He did not brief me on a civilian consultant." Kyle stepped beside Caldwell, eager to reclaim the moment. "That is because this is not a consulting problem, sir. It is a maintenance issue. We have trained personnel for that." Walter's eyes remained on Raven 12. "Then why is she still sitting here?" The words were not loud. They were not cruel. That made them worse. A small silence spread across the team. Even the generator seemed to lower its hum. Kyle's face tightened. "Because intermittent electronic faults take time. Because these aircraft are complicated. Because we do not just open panels based on ghost stories and gut feelings." Walter finally looked at him. There was no anger in the old man's gaze, only a clear and steady weight that made Kyle straighten without knowing why. "A machine does not become simple because a screen tells you it is fine," Walter said. "And it does not become complicated because men are afraid to listen." Caldwell lifted one hand, stopping Kyle before the answer came. "Enough. Mr. Harlan, with respect, this flight line is active, and this aircraft is under command authority. Unless you can show certification, written authorization, or direct orders, you need to step back behind the safety marker." Walter did not move. The wind tugged at the loose flap of his tool bag. One of the brass snaps clicked softly against the leather, a tiny sound beneath the heat, beneath the waiting aircraft, beneath the pride of younger men. Walter glanced down at the bag for half a second, then back at the Black Hawk. "I have stepped back from worse things than a yellow line," he said. "But not when men were waiting on the other side of one." Kyle Mercer stared at Walter for a moment, and the look in his eyes changed from irritation to open disbelief. He was not used to being answered that way. not by someone in faded denim with dust on his boots and no badge clipped to his chest. He gave a short laugh and turned toward the team as if inviting them to witness how unreasonable the old man had become. "Listen to this," Kyle said. "Now we are getting a lecture on courage from a man with a yard sale toolkit." Caldwell did not laugh, but he did not stop him either. That silence gave Kyle permission to continue. He stepped closer to Walter, close enough to look down at the cracked leather bag and the old brass buckle hanging from its front flap. "What did you work on, Mr. Harlan? Hueys? Jeeps? Maybe a generator out behind some motor pool in 1971. One technician smiled. Another looked away. Noah Bennett kept his eyes on Walter because the old man's expression had not changed, and that was the part that unsettled him. Most men pushed back when insulted. Some folded. Walter did neither. He simply absorbed the disrespect as if it were weather passing over stone. Kyle pointed toward Raven 12. "This is not some jungle bird held together with tape and luck. This is a Black Hawk. Dual engine. Advanced avionics. Integrated fault monitoring. Digital maintenance tracking. The aircraft tells us what it needs." Walter's gaze moved from Kyle to the silent helicopter. "No," he said. "It tells you what it can measure." The word struck Kyle harder than a shout would have. His smile thinned. "With all due respect, you are out of your depth." Walter gave a faint nod, almost as if agreeing with the shape of the insult, but not the truth inside it. "I have been out of my depth before." Caldwell exhaled through his nose. The delay was becoming visible. Men who had begun the afternoon confident were now sweating through their collars. A senior visitor convoy waited near the command building. The rescue team in the foothills had radioed again asking whether they should break position. Every screen still glowed green. Every green line made the failure more humiliating. Kyle reached toward the tool bag before Walter could stop him. He did not yank it hard enough to be openly rough, but he touched it carelessly, as if old things did not deserve permission. The leather creaked. A small wrench slipped from the side pocket and fell to the concrete with a clean metallic tap. It was not impressive. Short handle, worn grip, the kind of tool a young technician might toss into a drawer and forget. Kyle looked down and laughed again. There it is. The miracle. Walter's eyes dropped to the wrench. The flight line seemed to fade around him. Heat shimmer became rain. Dry Alabama wind became rotor wash over wet ground. The concrete apron became wet metal beneath his boots. For a heartbeat, he was no longer 78 years old at Fort Redstone. He was young again, crouched inside the trembling belly of an aircraft that had no patience left for mistakes. Red instrument light washed over anxious faces. The radio crackled with broken instructions. Somewhere behind him, a crewman repeated fuel numbers in a voice that tried to stay calm and failed by inches. Walter remembered the smell most clearly. Hot oil, damp canvas, burned dust rising from metal seams. Fear had a smell too, though no manual had ever named it. The pilot had looked back once, not asking for a miracle, only asking whether the machine had another few minutes left in her. Walter had not answered with words. He had opened the same leather bag, pulled out the same small wrench, and crawled into the narrow space where the problem lived. There had been no perfect light, no diagnostic code, no green confirmation telling him he was right. Only vibration through his wrists, a stubborn rhythm in the frame, and the old truth every crew chief learned sooner or later. An aircraft could hide pain from instruments. It could not hide it from hands that knew her. He had tightened one fitting, eased another back into alignment, and listened as the dying tremor changed its voice. Not fixed, not safe, just willing. Sometimes willing was enough to get home. The memory faded with the sound of rain becoming generator hum. Walter bent down, picked up the wrench, and wiped a fleck of dust from its handle with his thumb. When he stood, his voice was still quiet. That little tool has brought more crews home than your laptop has ever met. The laughter was gone now, not because Kyle believed him, because no one knew how to laugh at a sentence that sounded like a headstone. Caldwell cleared his throat, impatient with a silence he could not control. "Mr. Harlan, memories do not repair aircraft." Walter slipped the wrench back into the side pocket of the bag and looked at Raven 12. "No," he said, "but they teach a man where machines learn to lie." Kyle shook his head and opened the laptop again, almost violently. "We are done with poetry. The fault tree says auxiliary power is clean." Walter lifted his chin toward the small panel behind the housing. "Then your fault tree is standing in the wrong forest." The words hung over the flight line with enough weight to make even Kyle stop typing. For a second, no one moved. Raven 12 sat in the heat, silent and patient, its dark fuselage reflecting thin waves of sunlight. Its open panels showed nothing that looked broken to the men who had spent all morning hunting for failure. Kyle looked from the laptop to the panel Walter had indicated, then back again, as if the screen might defend him. "That section is not part of the start fault," he said, forcing each word through his teeth. "It monitors auxiliary stability and environmental load. It does not command the sequence." Walter stepped closer to the yellow safety line. "Not directly." Caldwell's head turned. "Meaning what?" Walter lifted one hand, palm facing the aircraft, and pointed with 2 fingers toward the underside of the auxiliary power housing. "Meaning if that line sends a perfect signal at the wrong moment, the aircraft believes it is protecting itself. She does not fail open. She refuses to wake up." The explanation was simple enough to sound impossible. Kyle gave a hard smile and shook his head. "That is not how the system logic works." Walter's eyes did not leave the panel. "That is how machines work when a clean signal comes from a dirty place." Noah Bennett felt the sentence settle somewhere behind his ribs. He had been quiet too long, but his mind was moving fast now. He looked at the data trace from the last failed start. There it was. A line so clean he had skipped over it every time. No spike. No warning. No red box. Just a perfect little confirmation arriving a fraction too early. Neat as a lie told by someone who had practiced. "Kyle," Noah said carefully, "the auxiliary stability return is time-stamped before the starter request." Kyle turned on him. "Because the system buffers the readout." Noah swallowed, but he did not look away. "It should not buffer before the request exists." The air changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough that several technicians leaned toward the screen at once. Caldwell removed his sunglasses. Kyle snatched the tablet from Noah's hand and stared at the trace. His jaw tightened again, but this time the anger had nowhere clean to go. "It is a logging artifact," he said. Walter gave the smallest shake of his head. "It is a ghost handshake." The old phrase meant nothing to half the team, but one senior mechanic near the back looked up sharply. Walter continued, voice low and even. "A connector can look seated and still carry memory through corrosion. A shield can look grounded and still sing when heat gets inside it. The aircraft hears yes before it asks the question, so it stops asking." Kyle looked toward Caldwell, hoping command authority might erase what the data had just admitted. Caldwell was no longer looking at him. He was looking at Walter. The old man had not touched the Black Hawk. He had not opened a manual. He had not needed permission from a screen. He had listened to one failed start and found the one place no one had considered because it looked too perfect to be guilty. Walter nodded toward the small panel again. "Open that, and you will find a connector that has been clean on paper for too long." Noah stepped forward before anyone could stop him. "Sir, request permission to inspect the auxiliary panel." Caldwell hesitated, caught between pride and urgency. Kyle snapped, "Absolutely not. We are not breaking a sealed panel because an old man gave us a campfire story." Walter lowered his hand. His face returned to stillness, but his eyes remained fixed on Raven 12. "Then start her again," he said, "and listen when she refuses." The second attempt failed exactly the way Walter said it would. The cockpit technician reached for the sequence. The relay clicked beneath the belly. The frame gave that small restrained shiver. Then Raven 12 went silent again. Not smoking, not groaning, just refusing with the calm stubbornness of a locked door. This time, nobody laughed. Kyle Mercer stared at the aircraft as if personal betrayal had been built into its wiring. Lieutenant Caldwell turned slowly toward him, waiting for an answer that would protect command, schedule, and pride all at once. Kyle had none, so he reached for the only weapon he had left. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Pull the logs again. We are going back through the approved procedure from step 1. Walter's eyes stayed on the auxiliary panel. "You can read the same lie all afternoon," he said. "It will not become the truth." Kyle spun toward him. "That is enough." His voice cracked across the concrete, louder than it needed to be. "You walk in here with no badge, no current certification, no clearance in my system, and you talk down to people who actually know this aircraft." Walter did not answer. That seemed to anger Kyle more than any insult could have. Caldwell stepped between them, his face set now, all hesitation buried beneath rank and embarrassment. "Mr. Harlan, you were asked to observe. You have observed. This is now interfering with an active maintenance operation. Noah Bennett looked from Caldwell to Walter, then to the data trace still glowing on the tablet in his hand. His thumb hovered over the screen. He knew the chain of command. He knew what happened to young specialists who embarrassed officers in front of a team. But he also knew what he had seen. The timestamp. The impossible return signal. The old man following the fault without touching the machine. Noah slipped one step backward, then another, moving behind the power cart where the generator noise covered the first ring of his phone. He called the operations desk, asked for the general's aid, and spoke in a low rush when the line opened. This is Specialist Bennett on the flight line. I need to confirm whether Major General Whitaker sent a Mr. Walter Harlan to inspect Raven 12. There was a pause, then a sharper voice. Say that name again. Noah repeated it. The silence on the line changed shape. Meanwhile, Caldwell pointed toward the access road. You need to leave the restricted area now. Walter finally looked at him. Open the panel first. Kyle laughed once, but there was no humor left in it. He is still doing it. Caldwell's patience broke into something colder. He stepped forward and placed one hand on Walter's shoulder. Not forceful. Official. The kind of touch meant to move a man without asking him. The entire flight line seemed to tighten around that hand. Walter looked down at it, then back at Caldwell. In his eyes there was no fear. Only a sadness so old it made Noah stop breathing. From the phone against Noah's ear, the aide's voice returned, suddenly urgent. Do not let anyone remove him. The general is on his way. At that exact moment, far down the access road, tires whispered hard over sun-baked concrete, and 3 black command vehicles appeared beyond the hangar, moving fast enough to make every technician turn. The command vehicles crossed the apron in a tight line, dark windows flashing sunlight as they passed the hangar. No sirens sounded. No one shouted. That made their arrival feel heavier. Lieutenant Caldwell's hand lifted from Walter's shoulder as if the old man's jacket had suddenly become hot. Kyle Mercer turned toward the road, the color draining slowly from his confident expression. The first vehicle stopped 20 feet from Raven 12. Before the driver could fully step out, Major General Thomas Whitaker opened the rear door himself. He was tall, silver-haired, and moving with the kind of controlled urgency that made everyone else straighten without being told. 2 aides followed behind him, one still holding a folder, the other speaking into a radio with his voice lowered to a tight murmur. Caldwell snapped to attention. Kyle tried to do the same, but his hands were still half raised, caught between defiance and confusion. Whitaker did not return their greetings. He did not ask for a status report. He did not look at the laptops, the power carts, or the glowing green screens. His eyes went straight to Walter Harlan. For one long second, the entire flight line seemed to narrow around those 2 men. The general in pressed uniform and polished boots, the old veteran in a faded field jacket with a cracked leather bag at his side. Then Whitaker stopped in front of Walter, squared his shoulders, and gave him a salute so sharp it seemed to cut the heat itself. Every technician froze. Noah Bennett lowered the phone from his ear. Caldwell's mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. Walter looked at the general with that same quiet, worn expression, and after a moment he returned the salute. Slower, older, steady enough to make the silence deepen. Walter, Whitaker said, and the name carried something no rank could manufacture. I told them to expect you. Walter glanced toward Caldwell. They expected someone else. Whitaker's face hardened, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the kind of disappointment that moves through a room faster than anger. He turned at last to the young officer and the lead technician. You were given a gift today, gentlemen. You mistook it for interference. Caldwell swallowed. Sir, I was not informed that Mr. Harlan had active authorization. That is because I assumed, Whitaker said, his voice calm enough to be dangerous, that the name Walter Harlan still meant something on an Army aviation flight line. No one answered. The wind snapped the flag near the operations building. Whitaker looked at Kyle next. Do you know who taught the first Black Hawk transition crews how to diagnose failures when the manuals lagged behind the aircraft? Kyle's eyes flicked once toward Walter's tool bag. No, sir. He did. The words landed flat and final. Do you know who wrote half the field notes your training software was built from? Kyle's face went still. No, sir. Whitaker stepped closer to Raven 12 and rested one hand against the dark fuselage. He did. And when younger men trusted only what machines told them, Walter Harlan was the one they called when the machine stopped telling the truth. The technicians stood motionless around the folding table. The green screens suddenly looked less like proof and more like children repeating what they had been taught. Whitaker turned back to Walter. "You said it was auxiliary?" Walter nodded toward the small panel. "Dirty connector giving a clean answer too early." Whitaker did not hesitate. "Open it." Kyle started to speak, then stopped when the general's eyes cut to him. Whitaker's voice dropped. "From this moment forward, no one touches this aircraft unless Mr. Harlan tells them to." Walter bent down, picked up his leather tool bag, and walked past the yellow safety line. This time, nobody tried to stop him. Walter moved with a slowness that made the entire flight line lean closer. He did not hurry for the general, and he did not slow down for the men who had laughed at him. He set the leather bag on the concrete beneath the auxiliary housing, opened the brass snaps, and folded back the cracked flap as carefully as if he were opening something sacred. Inside were tools that looked ordinary until the light touched them, each one worn at the grip, each one shaped by years of use instead of display. Kyle Mercer stood 10 feet away, silent now, watching the old man choose the small wrench he had mocked minutes earlier. Walter knelt beside the access panel, and the movement cost him more than he allowed anyone to see. Noah Bennett noticed anyway. The old man's knee touched the concrete. His left hand rested briefly against the fuselage. For a second his eyes closed, not in weakness, but in greeting. Then he began. 2 fasteners came loose. Then 2 more. The panel opened with a soft metallic sigh, revealing a narrow pocket of wiring, connectors, shielding, and dust that had hidden behind perfect diagnostics all morning. Kyle stepped forward despite himself. Walter did not look up. Light. Noah moved first, grabbing a maintenance lamp and aiming it where Walter pointed. The beam caught the connector. To most of the team, it looked fine. Seated. Clean. Undamaged. Walter reached in with the wrench, not forcing anything, only easing the assembly away from its bracket by a fraction of an inch. Then he stopped. There. Noah leaned closer. A thin greenish stain traced one side of the connector seal, almost invisible beneath the shadow of the housing. Not enough to trigger a fault. Enough to carry a false return when the heat built up. Kyle saw it, and the last of his confidence left him without sound. Walter removed the connector, cleaned the contact with a small folded strip from his bag, reseated the shield, and tightened the bracket until the metal gave back the right kind of resistance. No drama. No speech. Just hands that remembered. When he closed the panel, Raven 12 looked exactly the same as before, dark and silent beneath the sun. That was the hardest part for the young men to understand. Sometimes the difference between dead and alive was too small for pride to see. Walter stood slowly. Noah reached out as if to help, then stopped before touching him. Walter gave the young specialist a faint nod of thanks anyway. Major General Whitaker looked toward the cockpit. "Run the start sequence." The technician inside swallowed hard and reached up. The first click came. Then the relay answered. 1 second passed. 2. A thin whine rose from deep inside the Black Hawk, soft at first, then stronger, climbing through the frame like breath returning to a body that had been waiting for the right hands. The turbine caught. The rotor blades began to turn, slow and heavy, cutting the hot Alabama air into circles. Dust lifted around Walter's boots. The tool bag shifted in the new wind. Men who had laughed now stood with their mouths closed and their shoulders stiff. Kyle stared at the spinning blades as if the aircraft had just testified against him. Lieutenant Caldwell stepped forward, his voice low. "Mr. Harlan, I owe you an apology." Walter picked up his bag and looked at the young officer for a long moment. "No," he said. "You owe the next old man a little patience." Caldwell had no answer. Neither did Kyle. The radio on Caldwell's shoulder crackled. "Raven 12, rescue team reports heat stress on one participant. Request updated lift time." The message snapped the flight line back into purpose. Caldwell looked to Whitaker. Whitaker looked to Walter. Walter listened to the aircraft for 3 seconds. The turbine note held steady. The tremor through the frame was clean. The old machine was not old, not young, not proud. It was ready. Walter nodded once. "She will fly." Caldwell turned to the crew. "Launch Raven 12." The movement that followed was immediate. Technicians who had stood frozen moments earlier came alive. Cables were cleared. Panels were secured. The cockpit crew ran final checks. The rotor wash built into a hard, hot wind that pushed shirts against bodies and sent dust spinning across the apron. Walter stepped back behind the yellow line, leather bag in hand. Noah stood beside him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Noah said, barely loud enough over the rising blades, "Sir, how did you hear it?" Walter watched Raven 12 lift her nose slightly as the crew loaded power. "I did not hear the failure," he said. Noah looked at him. Walter's eyes stayed on the helicopter. "I heard what was missing." The Black Hawk lifted from the concrete, slow at first, then clean, its shadow sliding over the flight line and across the boots of the men below. It banked north toward the ridge. Everyone watched until it became a dark shape against the white sky. Only then did Kyle Mercer step toward Walter. The lead technician looked younger now, not less intelligent, less certain that intelligence excused disrespect. "Mr. Harlan," he said. Walter turned. Kyle swallowed. "I was out of line." Walter waited. Kyle looked at the leather bag, then at the old man's face. "I touched your tools without asking. I mocked you in front of my team. I was wrong." The flight line was quiet enough to hear the remaining power units hum. Walter's answer came after a long pause. "Tools are easy to forgive." Kyle lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir. Men take longer." Kyle nodded once. He deserved that. Walter turned to Noah and reached into the side pocket of the leather bag. He pulled out the small wrench. The same one Kyle had called a miracle. The same one that had carried more stories than any screen on that apron. Noah stepped back. "Sir, I cannot take that. I am not giving it to you forever." Walter placed it in Noah's hand. "I am giving it to you until you understand why it matters." Noah held the tool like it was heavier than steel. "What should I do with it?" Walter looked toward the northern sky, where Raven 12 had disappeared beyond the ridge. "Listen before you use it." Major General Whitaker stood a few feet away, watching the exchange with an expression that belonged partly to command and partly to memory. Caldwell approached him quietly. "Sir, I will submit a formal incident report." "You will?" Whitaker said. "Yes, sir. And you will include the part where a specialist had the judgment to make the call his superiors should have made." Caldwell looked toward Noah. "Yes, sir." Whitaker's eyes moved to Kyle. "And the part where expertise became arrogance." Kyle stood still. "Yes, sir," Caldwell said again. Whitaker looked back at Walter. "Walter, the visitors are going to want to meet you." Walter almost smiled. "No, they are not." The general tilted his head. "You know that for a fact? They want the helicopter. They want the demonstration. They want the story that fits on a plaque." He picked up the leather bag. "I am not a plaque." Whitaker's face softened. "No, you never were." 20 minutes later, Raven 12 returned from the ridge with the rescue team secure. One participant had suffered heat stress, but was stable. The crew chief reported that the aircraft ran clean, no recurrence, no warning codes, no unstable signals. Clean. But this time, the word meant something. The Black Hawk settled onto the apron, rotor wash rolling across the flight line. Caldwell watched it land with a different face than the one he had worn earlier. Not relaxed, not proud, humbled. When the blade slowed, the crew chief climbed down and walked straight to Walter. He was young, maybe 30, with sweat darkening his collar and relief still bright in his eyes. "Sir," he said, "she flew like she was waiting on you." Walter looked at the Black Hawk. "No," he said. "She was waiting on all of you to stop arguing with her." A few technicians smiled. Not the earlier laughter. Something better. Respect finding its feet. By sunset, the access panel on Raven 12 had been tagged, photographed, and entered into the maintenance record. The official cause was written in cold technical language. Heat-sensitive contamination on auxiliary stability return connector, false pre-start signal, intermittent logic interruption. The unofficial cause passed through the flight line much faster. The old man was right. 2 days later, a new note appeared at the bottom of the training brief for Black Hawk Diagnostic Review. It was not long. It was not dramatic. But every technician saw it. When data is perfect and the aircraft is not, inspect the assumption. Under it, in smaller type, someone added the source. Harlan Field note, restored. Noah Bennett kept the wrench in his top drawer for 3 months. He did not use it often. That was not the point. When a system looked too clean, when a screen gave him an answer that felt too easy, he opened the drawer and looked at the old steel. He would hear Walter's voice in his head. Machines do not always tell the truth when they are scared. At the end of the 3rd month, Noah drove out to a small house outside Huntsville with the wrench wrapped in a clean cloth. Walter met him on the porch in the same faded field jacket. No ceremony, no cameras, no general, just two men and an old tool between them. Noah handed it back. I think I understand it now. Walter took the wrench, looked at it, then at Noah. No, he said. Noah's face fell slightly. Walter slipped the wrench back into the cloth and pressed it into Noah's hand again. But you were starting to. Noah stood there, unable to speak. Walter looked past him toward the road, where the evening light lay soft over the trees. Keep it until you teach somebody else. Years later, Kyle Mercer would become a better technician because of the day he embarrassed himself in front of a dead Black Hawk and an old man with a leather bag. Lieutenant Caldwell would become a better officer because he learned that command was not the same as control. Noah Bennett would become the kind of mechanic who paused before trusting a perfect screen. And Walter Harlan would remain what he had always been. Quiet, unpolished, difficult to list on a form. The kind of man systems forget until something important stops working. Raven 12 kept flying. Not because technology failed. Not because old ways beat new ways. Because, for one afternoon under the Alabama sun, a room full of young men learned that progress without humility is just another way to go blind. Machines remember the hands that once saved them. And sometimes, so do men.